Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Drivetime Podcast, brought to you by Keyloop. This is the global auto tech podcast that shines the light on all of the innovation that's happening around us in this industry and also puts you in the driving seat so you know what's coming and how you can be ready for it. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Rebecca Day, who is the CEO and founder of She's Electric and also Still Curious. Welcome to the show,
Thank you.
I'll call you Bex because I know Rebecca is your full name, but...
And I'm not in trouble.
You're not in trouble.
No,
I won't
Bex
use both
is
of
good.
your names.
Yes.
Bex is good.
Yeah.
So just a little bit about you, Bex. We met in the weirdest of circumstances on the EV Cafe panel at Carfest last year, and it was raining sideways.
Yep.
And we had to try and look less frizzy and then talk eloquently about what's happening in the industry to a group of people. So just for the audience, give me a little background about you, because you've been running businesses now for a number of years, but primarily in automotive.
Yeah, so I have got a bit of an automotive background. I'd say it's more marketing and events, but Carfest was kind of a coming home because I'd actually worked on Carfest. So it was very strange to be going there not having anyone asking me, or actually it was a bit sad that I wasn't driving one of those little buggies, because that's the best bit about working in events is having a radio and driving buggies. But yeah, so I had to actually go and do something at the event. It was the EV Cafe panel, wasn't it? Which, yeah, I hadn't met you before. I hadn't met Sarah before. I don't quite know where the request came from, but it was fab. It was great. And obviously talking about women in automotive, and I always say I feel like a slight outsider when it comes to that, because I suppose my career hasn't been predominantly in automotive. Like, I've not sort of risen through the ranks of various automotive companies. I did work at Aston Martin for a little while, which I'm not sure is indicative of every automotive company out there. I think it's far more eccentric. But yeah, so I have a background knowledge of that, and that's obviously helped me in terms of what I do now. But yeah, wouldn't class myself as a petrol head in any way, shape or form.
Oh God! Well, you can be an EV. You can be an EV head. I'm a petrol head, having worked in automotive like most of my career. So, just starting on Still Curious, you founded an agency. You kind of started out with I think that we can do things better. Just talk about Still Curious and where that kind of came from, and then we can talk about She's Electric, because I think there's so many learnings from the work you're doing in the EV space that I'd like to help retailers understand more.
Still Curious was founded about 6 years ago with a colleague of mine, Joe. And that was mainly that we were working together, doing great stuff, a lot of public sector work. So a lot of working with people like Innovate UK, Eureka, which is a global innovation agency. And obviously that meant that we were spending a lot of time around people doing incredible things, all different sectors. But I think perhaps because we'd come from quite high octane, for want of a better word, private sector stuff. So particularly I started my career at London Fashion Week, which you wouldn't really know from looking at me now. But there's some big events. I've done things like T4 on the beach with Channel 4. If you can deal with, I don't know how many sort of 50,000 screaming teenagers and JLS falling off the stage and all that sort of stuff, then, you can deal with that high octane environment. But then when we went to work with the public sector, they were all like, oh my goodness, this is great, this is amazing, this is, and we were kind of like, oh, cool. Well, because what we do is a matter of course. So I remember we were stood on the Royal Yacht Britannia by the Queen's piano, and I remember saying to each other, we're quite good at this, and we were like, well, shall we start a company? And that was essentially, that was all the thought that went into it, as all great ideas, you sort of don't worry about the detail and you just think, we'll just do it anyway. And then, so we started that business, but I got pregnant like quite unexpectedly, quite early on in that journey. And Jo, who was my business partner at the time, was absolutely incredible. It was just me and my baby and Jo. And so I didn't have any maternity leave, and we sort of started the business in the neonatal ward at Paddington, so just down the road from here. So it was all a very, very bonkers sort of situation. And then COVID hit as well. And obviously we'd planned this to be a strong element of live event creation, which they weren't so, it wasn't so popular during COVID. So we did a lot of pivoting. We're unprecedented times. So we were pivoting. And we ended up just doing all sorts of things and getting more involved in that strategy and marketing. And that's sort of how the agency was founded. And it really was about, like you say, doing things differently, working with purpose-driven organisations, people who were trying to do the right thing, trying to do a good thing. So we did a lot of work with charity. So we did some work with people like Children with Cancer, which is how we met Jo Elvin, who's now one of our hosts. yeah, met some incredible people in that time. And then She's Electric was born a few years later.
So founding in events, because you come out of live events and working in, like you say, T4, Channel 4, some really crazy big events,
Yeah.
I actually thought there's something in this. People want to get together. There's a human connection here.
Before COVID hit, I remember writing some thoughts and propositions around, like, what Still Curious was. And I think we were both quite... I'm actually not the most sociable person. Jo is far more sort of sociable. She'd definitely be more active. I'm quite happy to sit and watch a million box sets one after the other, and I have to be like shoehorned out of the house to go and do but I still see the value of that, getting together. And in an age where so much is online, so much social media, and obviously everything that's going on at the moment and everything that we're watching in terms of adolescence and all sorts, even back then we felt like having the background that we'd got made us really truly appreciate those moments that you get when you're in a collective, whether it's moments of reassurance or moments of just pure joy or euphoria, or you can't get that from a screen. But we were well aware that times are changing and those two worlds were going to have to join together and meet. And I think that's where Still Curious came from. So the idea of doing hybrid events and making sure that it was, things like a hybrid event journey was very much in its infancy. So it was almost sort of like you did the great stuff at this event and then it was like, oh, just live stream it. And so it was like, how can we actually make that experience, also, really valuable? So we spent a lot of time trying to join those kind of two journeys up together. But yeah, it all comes from, trying to get me off my sofa. And, if I like an event, if I go to an event, it's got to be a good one.
I think there has to be a build-up as well. So I was chatting yesterday with Bauer, actually, and they were talking about Company Car in Action it's a great event, but actually brands spend loads of money going to an event in the moment. You spend a fortune if it's a motor show, building a stand, moving your stock, having your humans. But then how do you keep that event live? And how do you kind of get people the build up to it and then the follow on from it, I think, is where you see the value in your investment, actually.
100%. And my biggest bugbear is people that spend a lot of money on content generation at things like this, and then it just sits in someone's top drawer forever. And you're right, some of these activations are eye-wateringly expensive. And I think, ROI it's a huge part of when I think there are some heritage and some legacy events in the automotive industry. They are dwindling. But, you sort of, if someone was to look at it on a blank piece of paper now, they'd go, sorry, we're spending how much to be there? And explain to me again. And I think a lot of, I guess, sort of the more historical events, it became a kind of, if you're not there, what are you saying about yourself, rather than why you are there. And I think that is changing now. For me, it's about trying to make sure that you've got that customer journey that starts way before the event and it kind of carries through. And with She's Electric, which we'll go on probably to talk about in a bit, it's very much about the whole campaign and the whole creative. And actually, the brands that do it best with us are the ones that understand that, and the ones that understand that there needs to be a significant investment in, more so in the pre-event than the actual event itself. I mean, our events can be quite small. They can be only, let's say, 200 people a day, doing test drives or whatever. To actually get a whole fleet of cars on, as anyone in a retailer environment or an OEM knows, to get those moving around the country, that is an expensive endeavour. To get an agency to support you to do those sorts of things, if you're not making the most of that and making sure that is amplified, whether it's digitally or in your comms, or you're using every little bit of content that you've captured, what we give you is like some incredible footage and images of women actually really engaging in cars, in tech, and everything. Like, if they're perfect to be used, even if it is in a dealership, on your slide screens, all that sort of stuff that we can give you. It's real, it's authentic stuff. It's not AI generated, and it's not, as I used to find in my old automotive days, a woman in a pencil skirt with high heels driving around Lake Como, because we all do that on a regular basis. I don't know. Yeah,
I think that's not great. Weirdly, so I was at the SMMT Electrified event last week before last, and there was an amazing keynote by, I think it was the Chief Innovation Officer at Scania, and they showed loads of images of their trucks, EV, truck technology that's coming, and 2/3 of the images had women driving trucks.
Yeah.
Which I thought was great.
Yeah.
There was a real intent, and I don't want this episode to be about women in automotive at all, but I do want to kind of touch on that experience, because when you think about how the reason women don't drive trucks as much is because most of the time when you have to stop, it's not so they're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
There are no toilets. It's things like the basic stuff. So I actually don't want to make it about women, because it's actually more about, I think, how we use events and different campaigns to reach consumer groups where they need to be met. So I think when you think about how consumers are turning up at live events, and one of the things you mentioned about in your early days, when you get big tribes of people, big cohorts going to a concert or going to a venue, I've actually noticed there's more automated advertising and placement now at big sporting fixtures than I've ever seen. Actually, I think we've always seen, like, leasing.com will sponsor stadiums, BYD will sponsor whole tournaments. So we've got like a whole, the real investment seems to be targeting these sort of cohorts of people. What have you seen over the last sort of few years that you've been doing this? Are brands spending differently, or are they still thinking, I've got to spend all this money in this one place, or I'm going to just... So what's been your observation?
I think, are they spending differently? I think to a certain degree they are. I've just seen, I don't know when it was, it shows how many festivals I go to, but I've just noticed that like Audi is sponsoring Wilderness now, and actually, what a great brand fit. And I think that there's still a certain amount of badging that goes on, but it's less so than it has been before. And it's they're thinking a bit more about all the different add-ons and the experiences that you can have as part of an event sponsorship. I just think consumers are increasingly more savvy, or I don't know, sort of emotionally driven, and also the access to information, the way we consume information. What you were saying then about, obviously we don't want this to be about, where the way men do this and the way women do this. It's actually about the fact that the days of assuming that everyone consumes in the same way have to be over. It just so happens that the world I live in is based around that data point of how women are not engaging with net zero technology in the same way that men are. So that's just a problem that I'd like to fix, and then I shall go away and no longer do women's events. So it's very much about that. Within all of those, it's all about the fact there are tons of different tribes and tons of different ways people consume information, where they get their, who they trust, where they get those recommendations from. And that isn't necessarily genderized. Obviously, say what I do is to a certain extent because of that data, but it's actually about the technology that is now available to us in terms of personalization, in terms of like CRM journeys, in terms of all of that stuff, should make it far easier to be delivering something that is incredibly personalised or bespoke to that person. And I think that's how we kind of feel. Obviously, that's harder to do in an event scenario than it is to do in a digital one. But it is how we feel about our events. We're very mindful of who it is that should be coming along, and the types of, even to the point of looking at the lifestyle brands we involve in them. We've got to make sure they're the right type of lifestyle brands for the person that we are targeting. And I suppose it's not necessarily about consumers being more savvy. It's just having bigger expectations. Wanting to see value, and it's not just value for money, it's value for time. We're all so time poor that if you're asking me to spend 4 hours away from, in my case, my sofa, but in someone else's case, I don't know, something wholesome like a hike or whatever, you're asking them to do, it's actually worth more to them than a ticket price. It's you've got to be constantly showing that value. And I think that's where we come at it from. It's always from that audience and consumer point of view, not about what you want to say to them, but what they want to hear and how they want to hear it.
Yeah, so I think just delving into the data, you just mentioned there that women are engaging less with net zero technology or data than men. So how are the consumer groups behaving, and then because the whole purpose of this podcast is about how do you understand the right data points so that you can either use technology or the right engagement to meet a consumer where they are. And we obviously, as an industry, have got to help consumers make that switch. So I think it's really important to understand kind of what's getting in the way of it, and then how can we support retailers or OEMs to kind of navigate their way around it. So just come back on the data point back, because I'm really curious to find out about that.
I think the interesting thing about the data point is that it's built on data, obviously, is that I think uniquely in the world of EV, because it is so closely related to sustainability, you have a kind of like self-greenwashing issue going on. So when you're getting data from, you know, when you're sort of talking about your sort of ICE cars, you know, your historic market and stuff, you're asking pretty straightforward questions. You're asking people about their purchases. You're asking people about what they like or don't like about a particular product. Two sides to the EV side of things is, number one, you're asking them about a change to their lifestyle. So it's not just about that product, it's about something much bigger. But you're also asking people about something that, if you are good, you will say you want to be more sustainable, you want to save the planet, or I want to make sure that this world is perfect for my grandchildren and children and everything else. So I think what we've sort of come a cropper a little bit with is by taking some of that data at face value. And I think that's one thing that we've been like so surprised by. But it's also like, it's sort of lovely that we've created these safe spaces where someone can be like, yeah, I know I meant to say that I want a really good world for my grandchildren, but oh my God, life's so short and I'm so tired and I just want it easy and I want it fun, or I don't want to drive a spaceship to Sainsbury's, which is, you know, because that kind of thing comes up quite a lot. It's, you know, it's literally, when you get them to fill in something, a bit of data online, we do a lot of, you know, pre and post event surveys and all sorts of things. When they're filling that in, you get a lot of, absolutely, I want to be this and I want to be that. You scratch the surface, or you just get them in a room or with a lot of coffee or maybe a glass of wine, and you're hearing actually that it's not as straightforward as that. You know, it's, everybody does want to be altruistic, but they also have lives, and, you know. So I think in terms of that data point, it's just understanding that there are some potential pitfalls that we fall into, and the biggest pitfall of all is sort of essentially what underpins most of She's Electric, which is, we thought that all the data showed us that women are typically more sustainable in all of the choices that they make, which is generally the case. So, you know, they're in charge of household budgets or whatever. So that, you know, if you're looking at, you know, food shopping, or you're looking at clothing, or you're looking at all these things, it wasn't the case with it isn't the case with cars, and it isn't the case with some of those bigger purchase decisions. And that's not because women don't care, or they're not interested, or they don't understand, or all those, you know, ridiculous things. It's because of sort of the historic nature of everything, you know, things, you know, when it comes to all the way back to STEM, you know, all the way back to, you know, women getting involved in the science and technology sides of education. It's just, you know, and if you look at historically how, you know, the OEMs have spoken to women in the past, it's changing rapidly. But I think that's what underpins a lot of this, I guess, not quite the right approach for a lot of, and I wouldn't even say women, it's a lot of lifestyles. It's just that different people have different priorities, different needs and wants when it comes to driving or even just sort of changing their lifestyle. And that's what's important, is being able, with all the technology that we've got right now, being able to be a bit more bespoke in how we're connecting with people.
How we target consumers. So what you're saying then is sustainability as a topic is less sexy for people to, it's not really driving their decisions. They might say that it is, but it isn't. Is that what the research is saying?
I guess the face-to-face stuff that we've done would suggest that it is still driving people's decisions, but we can't, there's two worlds there. There's the theoretical and there's the practical. So there's the theoretical where you always want to be doing all the right things and you want to be behaving in a certain way, and there are an incredible number of the population who do manage to live like that, and, you know, it's amazing. But I think where it comes in is that idea of sort of like guilt, and I've talked about this before in terms of, you know, there are a lot of people out there who have made the switch to electric, and I know there's a sort of a theory that you get some of those people who have made the switch and who are very positive about it to talk to those people who haven't, and that does sometimes work. But equally, we have an issue sometimes where the kind of people get a bit overzealous about having made that switch or how you should make that switch, and what's actually happening is some of our audience are a bit like, don't try and change me. Don't try, actually, you know, I'm fine with the way I am. So it's sort of understanding all of that behavioural change element, really, which is like, what are those barriers for people? What are the motivators? What is actually making them want to make that change, really? And actually, what's stopping them? And we came up, I mean, some of the research we did recently, some people were like, actually, I don't want to drive an EV. I think EV drivers are smug. It's the smug elite. You know, they're expensive, and if you can afford it, you know, and you have all these little things that they all add up to very different purchase journeys. And I think that's where, when we have the initial conversations with someone about what they want to drive, or what's going to power the car they want to drive, there are just it doesn't necessarily come down to the product anymore. I think in EV more so, it comes down to the lifestyle that you lead, how you lead it. You know, when you sell a car, historically, you haven't had to ask someone like, you know, how often do you drive to Scotland? Or, you know, how do you feel about, where's your nearest charge point? How do you feel about that? What tariff are you on? What, you know, what provider do you have for your, do you have, what apps do you have on your phone? It's a completely different landscape. And I think I don't envy anyone in retail or any of these dealerships who are having to make that transition to selling a lifestyle rather than selling a product.
I think you're right. I think when we think about how consumers buy online, and we had Sophus in the studio for the last episode, and they were looking at how consumers are behaving and those different touch points and where they get consumer reviews and then how they engage and re-engage, and they'll be on the OEM's website, then they'll go off and they'll look at a reader review and they'll do something else. But the communities that will inform behaviour change are kind of, like you say, they can feel like the smug elite, people that drive EVs, the early adopters. And Scott said this in that episode, they were geeky. They were were, and they had their own sort of like chat rooms where they were talking, these early adopters were trying to sort of, and you'll always get this in any new technology, you'll get the early adopters who feel like they are ahead of the game. They are ahead of the game, actually, because they've adopted technology before the rest of us. And then you get that kind of early majority, and then you'll start to get sort of mid-market penetration, and then you'll start to... So any product life cycle adoption is, you've got early adopter, early, whatever, and then it kind of goes through till you get penetration or saturation, and then you kind of go into the next iteration of what's coming after it. You made a really good point about how it's not easy for retailers now having to explain to a consumer or understand a consumer's life cycle or a life stage. But they play a really important role in this change. And obviously OEMs are penalised if they don't sell EVs. So they're relying very much on the retailers to make that difference and to think differently about selling EVs. What should they be helping consumers understand when a consumer walks in, having maybe done some research? What are the questions that they should be asking? Imagine I'm a consumer, you're a retailer. What would you sort of be thinking about?
I think within the parameters of not overreaching, but asking more about lifestyle, asking more about existing concerns, asking more about who they will be driving with, or even things. I mean, there is just a slightly softer element to this, which is, I mean, one lady we had was saying, I just want my car to be a hug. I just want my car to be a hug. And I just thought, well, and it's like, it's that kind of thing. Well, why is it a hug for you? Like what, or I was talking to someone who was who's working at a dealership, who said that a lady had come in to buy a new car, and she'd done it on an exchange, and she'd bought this new car, and she was very excited about it, and it was all this sort of step up and everything else. And then he walked outside and he saw her just standing, and she was crying in the car park, and he was like, "Why are you crying?" She was like, "I'm just saying goodbye to this car. It's done me so well. I had 2 kids while I had this car, and she's got that kind of like emotional connection to it. And it sounds ridiculous. I don't think my dad's ever stood in a car park like crying as he like switched from one fast car to another or whatever. But, I just think that the days of taking the mickey out of that have to go. These are big investments. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? How much a car costs for anyone. It's such a huge proportion of your income. Mm. And if that is the way someone feels about it, then we have to understand, that switching from a key to a card could be a huge thing for them. I want a key. I'm used to having a key. I've had a key for 40 years, and I think there's all those sort of softer questions that can be asked. And I think, I know that I can't remember what the latest stats are, but I think it's somewhere around only like sort of less than 20% of salespeople are female. I think, if you can up that number or get that balance a bit better, you have got, and again, it's not genderized. It's just about the more different types of people you have communicating with the people walking in through your door, the more likely you are to find that rapport or to build that understanding.
I think one of the big data points, I spoke to the MD of Google Canada, and she was saying that their data is showing that women are more likely to buy on like a budgetary touch point rather than, and not to stereotype it, but men, just in terms of search terms, they tend to be more interested in performance of vehicle, like 0 to 60. I've got 3 sons, they're all petrol heads. Performance is the thing. Yeah. I run the family budget. So for me, I think the question is, and when I was going through the car buying journey recently, I do have a driveway and I can have an at-home charger. So I think simple questions like, have you thought about, do you have a driveway? Have you thought about an EV?
Yeah.
Rather than, or a hybrid, or how do you, at the moment I could save, I only fill up once a month. Most of my local journeys are done on my battery. So I think that's the thing where, yes, you're right, retailers have never historically had to give it a second thought about where I might fill up my vehicle, because if they sell me the vehicle, I drive away. They see me when I service it or when I'm coming to renew. They don't have to think about helping me into that experience. And we'll talk about She's Electric in a minute, because I think the shift of experience is the bit where we start to see behaviour change. But actually just understanding consumers, have you thought about how much more you're going to spend your money on if you probably spend £200 a month less on fuel?
Yeah, and you're completely right. At She's Electric events, when we first started this, and my co-founder Gemma, she used to describe it as hiding vegetables in your child's food, because we weren't sure whether Evie was the vegetable that we were hiding between lots of lovely lifestyle brands and some great hosts and a great time. Turns out it wasn't actually the vegetable that needed to be hidden, because the questions that were coming up were exactly like you're saying. They were so precise. I mean, to the point where people were saying, like, okay, Erin, you said you filled your car up, so you charged your car last night. How much did it cost you? And Erin would be like, £4.87 or whatever. And it was real specific, precise questions. And that is essentially how a lot of our brains work. We're literally like, hang on a minute, are you telling me I'm going to save money? And so I think it is just about the difficulty, because there is so much data, so much information. Like, where do you go for the right bit of information? Who do you trust? Like, who's trying to persuade you to do what and for what reason? And I think there's a lot of that around, particularly with the media. But yeah, to your point, that question about, how much is it going to cost me? The practicalities of this. How often am I going to have to do that then? And even to the point where we've got people saying, well, my house is actually like this. Do you think I could get one of those on the outside of my house? Could this work? And so it's not, as some people have levelled at me, some idea of like some very fluffy sort of organisation where it's like, come along, have a glass of Prosecco and get a goodie bag and have a look at a car from a great distance. It's not that at all. It's literally like, take the salespeople out of the equation, get in that car with a mate, play around, make mistakes. There's no one watching you when you just press that button and you should have pressed that button. Enjoy it. Have a bit of time to get to understand that it's not this technology that is only for early adopters and is completely and utterly different. Because I do think there's still a bit of emperor's new clothes that go on around this. And I understand why it was done that way, in terms of, you want to give yourself a sort of unique proposition. Electric is so much better because it's this, that, and the other. I think there's a huge proportion of our audience and of the population who just want to know that it's like driving a car. And I think sometimes what we do is we get overexcited about all these sort of things that electric can give you, but forgetting that for a lot of people, it's a need and not a want. That's the right way around. No,
I know you do a lot of work with Auto Trader. You mentioned Erin, who's the editor-in-chief at Auto Trader. And so I think marketplaces like that have a great opportunity. They do a lot of research around consumer behaviour, and they can obviously track what consumers are doing online. So I think I know they launched a campaign called No Driver Left Behind, and it's about the driveway, basically. So it's making sure that there's some crazy statistic, like I think 80% of driveways still don't have charging points fitted, but we could really make a lot more of the EV world accessible. A good one of my friends that works at Ford, she made the decision to go for an EV without having an at-home charge point, and her husband was really worried about it. She's like, I actually trust the range and I trust the technology to be able to charge when I need to charge and have enough range to get us around when we need to get around. So there are some people where you think, oh my God, am I taking a leap of faith? Or are there those 80% of driveways that don't have an at-home charger that we could start to see at-home charging really accelerating? And there are some amazing charge point providers now that connect directly into your app. So I think there's a lot of, it's almost like multi-industry education. How can we work with the technology that sits behind the electric? Octopus Energy now provide tariffs, I'm sure, and they also provide the technology to other electric providers, EV suppliers, who can tap into their technology to start to manage tariffs. And we just don't do that in any other in any other kind of way. So I think there's a lot that we can do. But just coming back to the work that I know you're doing with OEMs to kind of create these events where you get consumers, and you've mentioned the data points and the questions that you hear are around things like cost of ownership, or I don't want to look stupid when I get in the car. So just talk a little bit about the events that you've done and what you see from consumers, and then also how do they feel when they arrive, but then how do they feel when they leave?
We get the full funnel actually at the events. I'd say different to say a fully charged or an actual automotive event. I think the Venn diagram of people who would go to something like fully charged and who would go to She's Electric, they're very far apart. I think it's a lot of people who wouldn't spend 3 or 4 hours at a specific, electrification event or a specific automotive event. They are higher up in that funnel. We do get some that are kind of in that consideration phase, but for a lot, it's very much in that kind of exploratory area. And they come along, and for a large amount of our audience, it's the first time they've ever driven an electric vehicle, which for an OEM, I think is priceless, because that loyalty thing there, women are actually, according to data, more loyal purchasers, in as much as maybe it's just because we haven't got the time to be like, we find something we like. We're like, yeah, well, I mean, I think I've said this to you before. I've had the same car in the same colour the last 3 times because I'm too busy to think about anything else. It works, But I think we get a bit of that where, you've had a really great experience. You've got in this car for the first time. It's worked for you. Why bother, going and looking at other things, and you have that in your mind. Okay, it was VW that was my first electric car drive, or it was something, and that is something, again, on that emotional behavioural side of things, that is important. We get a lot of people who are doing that for the first time. We get a lot of people who are wanting to sort of, it's a holistic thing. So for us, it's not necessarily just about the electric vehicle. We have 2 or 3 different types of events, but the consumer ones are very much about, your sustainable lifestyle, about appreciating that you don't have to sacrifice style for sustainability these days. There are loads of incredible brands out there, from anything from skincare to fashion to whether it's supplements or anything like that. It's about looking at how these people are creating their products or their services. So obviously we have, a lot of B Corp, a lot of people who are doing 1% for the planet, people who are doing their best to do, sort of do the right thing. So that's a sort of important part of the event. And we also have quite a strong sort of confidence building element to it as well, because a lot of the issue around getting in that car and driving a new technology or experiencing any new technology for the first time is around confidence, and is around actually just feeling like you've got the capability to do it. So we have panels there who are kind of, inspirational in a way, and we get this really lovely community feel at the events. And then the other side of things is She's Electric Works, which we'll be launching this year, and that is very much on the kind of female founders, entrepreneurs side of things, and that is how can you, with as little effort as possible, because we're all very busy, create a more sustainable business, and how, things we don't touch on necessarily sort of leasing and salary sacrifice in the consumer events as much, obviously. But when it comes to the works events, are you driving in the most cost effective way? And yeah, so we kind of have that side of things as well, that B2B side.
So you're working more with fleets to help their company car drivers kind of make the transition, or because obviously they are really driven into EVs because from a benefit in kind tax point of view.
Yeah, so fleets, I think where there's a bit of a gap at the moment is around that sort of SME side of things. So it's people who are just sort of scaling their business up a bit, who perhaps have fallen under the radar for a little while, but actually for whom these benefits are just as important, and they need to understand what's available to them, because I think in that kind of like scrabble of sort of startup entrepreneur life, these sort of things fall by the wayside, and you do need just like a really clear everything in one space. So you're telling me this is the car I need to drive, this is what I need to fit in terms of installing, how am I going to do that with my bills and everything else, and what does that mean as part of the bigger picture of the sustainability footprint or the carbon footprint of my company?
Do you know, as you're talking, Bex, I'm just thinking, like, wouldn't it be great if, I love this, and I learned this when we worked with some sort of very crazy people at Auto Trader, and they sort of switched, like, what do you do now? Wouldn't it be great if? So as we bring events more, because I venture to guess the events that you host with OEMs they're in an area that's like, it feels like it's quite special. And then how do we go from that early adopter space into because when you look at the people that do EVs really well, Norway, they have really significant adoption, but they also have significant infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I don't, I in my local area, I think, you start your subconscious brain will, if you buy an EV, you then start to look for the EV charging points, or if you have a hybrid. So where the public charging points are. And you think, great, I can park in the EV space and plug in while I'm here, which is great. So you get more access to those parking spaces. Some towns have very little in terms of infrastructure and very little in terms of off-street parking unless you're living in the right area. So I wonder whether or not this is where we can start to see, we get out of our own lane and we see retailers, so local businesses should be working with local councils, should be working with local supermarkets or shopping centres or areas where consumers go to try and actually come together and think about how can we, as a town, city, community, make it easier and be ready for this. Because if we're looking at how do we get to net zero by 2030, or we've got, we've got to try and sell more EVs by this date. There is a deadline. It's approaching rapidly. We're now, we're at 2025. There's going to take a real effort, and it's going to have to be a community. Are councils thinking about this? Do you get involved with any of those discussions, or
not too much in terms of the count? I'd love to get involved more, and I think it's something that's never enough hours in the day. But I think us actually working with specific councils and being able to help them put on events, from an educational perspective, it might be a bit more of a light touch. Whether or not. I think with She's Electric, I think obviously that idea that it is there to sort of support women. I think if we were doing something at council level, it would just, it would be for everybody, and it's really important that it would be an all-inclusive sort of activation. But the regional aspect of it is fascinating because, to the point, yes, you have some regions that they've got a great infrastructure, others that are not so great. When we do look at where we're going to do these events, and they are often quite regional, we do look at that infrastructure, or we look at the OEM that we're working with, and we look at what retail network they might have, or we look at the uptake, and it's about finding those places that are sort of on the up. That so there's no point in running these events in areas where actually making that transition is incredibly difficult because the infrastructure isn't there to support people to do it.
No, quite.
So it's that. But like you say, you go to one of these events and then suddenly you start to notice more things. You're like, that's the EV. Okay, and because you've been made aware of the stuff that is out there. Because if you were to read the newspapers, you'd assume that there was one charge point per county. Actually, when you've got that basis of information and knowledge, then you start to notice these things more. But even in terms of people, like the regional differences in terms of motivations, I mean, obviously, again, that's where I tend to fall on that side of behavioural change and and actually individuals and how they think and what makes people think different things. When we were running events, I think it was last year, and we did one that was in Surrey and one was in Kent, and we had to change the messaging in terms of benefits and why you come along to the event for neighbouring counties, because it's just different communities in different parts of the UK have different reasons as to why they might want to engage in a conversation around sustainability and EV, and how much lifestyle content they need, and how much actually they want to know more about the sustainability side of things. So I mean, and that's two neighbouring counties that have got such different. I mean, obviously, it's quite it's making general statements here, but that's how we had to market. We had to market them differently to get the same number of people to these two events. And again, that's where that messaging, that tailoring of messaging comes in. It's just so important.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? Where we see, like, my kids have just discovered Lime bikes, and I think that's brilliant that they can get to a station more quickly, and they can just hop on they use an app to find a thing. We had Sarah Noble in from Deloitte, and she was saying, I can get any car I want literally delivered within an hour. I don't need to own vehicles. And I think now, I'm just imagining, I actively look, and I wonder whether anyone listening to this now, actively look when you're going around your daily town or your kind of daily business, or you go to a shop to pick up a thing, or whether it's a supermarket, there are opportunities to really increase local penetration of charging points where people go regularly. And I think that for me is the opportunity, whereas if you see them everywhere, you will feel confident, because it's not about range anxiety anymore. It's just about if I can't charge at home, where can I charge? And if I could charge to 80% in an hour while I'm doing my weekly shopping, then I would go to that supermarket.
Yeah.
And did you say it was Audi or Aldi that have sponsored a wilderness conf?
Audi. You're thinking,
Audi.
yeah, Audi. You're thinking Aldi because of our conversation about your skincare routine.
I know, it's so funny.
No,
I was thinking, Audi are doing wilderness. They used to sponsor
Audi.
Polo. I don't know whether they still do, but I think isn't that funny how how the demographic has shifted in terms of where they're targeting their audiences.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is
wilderness
funny.
will be, or either that or someone at Audi really likes a good time and quite fancies a few days at wilderness. It's a great event.
I know. So about 6 years ago, I was working for an e-commerce agency, and the parent company was a retail loyalty agency.
Okay.
And they were, talking about loyalty, they were driving loyalty at supermarkets by giving you coupons to collect Pyrex crap, basically. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, you're giving me a coupon, you're giving me a paper thing to collect a thing I probably don't need that's unsustainable. And at the time I was thinking, why aren't they working with manufacturers to drive loyalty through charging?
Yeah.
You could, if I got, and you do it through fuel, you can get, if I have a loyalty card at a certain supermarket, I'll get pence off at the pump. Why are we not translating that into loyalty? Supermarkets, and who needs to have the conversation with people that own supermarkets, because some of the supermarkets will own their land, some of them won't, but actually somebody owns the land where those car parks are built, and why do we not have 2/3 of them now with charging points in them?
Yeah, who knows? I'm sure there are people who would be able to answer that question with more surety
we need to get
than
them on
I.
the podcast. If you know the answer to the question and you have an influence,
I can
please come
I'll
on the
send
podcast.
you a list of people who I think will know the answer to that question. But in terms of actually where you have these charge points, and again, it's just looking at from my perspective in terms of where women spend their time or how they live their lives, or you're talking there about range anxiety being not necessarily as prevalent as it was. There's still what I think we were sort of calling battery anxiety, and I think again it's understanding that for a lot of people, as much as you would not know how to fix an engine, so if something happened to your ice car, you wouldn't, but you're familiar with it, you'd see it and you've grown up with it, and if you're like me, you grew up on a farm and there are bits of engines everywhere, you don't, whereas if someone says to you there's a problem with a battery, you just feel like it's such a different thing, so completely away from your area of sort of expertise. And I think it's that level of familiarity and unfamiliarity that we're kind of working with. So again, to your point, if you're putting more of these charging points in areas of extreme familiarity, you're just narrowing that gap further and further, because that is one of the issues at the moment. It's like, I do not understand the battery technology. It sounds very sci-fi, therefore it must be unsafe. We don't think of it in terms of, we almost have to draw those parallels between like your phone. We talk about, reconditioned batteries and secondhand things and all, and again, that's something that we're going to be looking at. It'll be next year now. I can't do everything all at once as much as I try. So pre-loved is another initiative that we'll be working on, and that is about building confidence in the second-hand EV market, because a lot of people out there are kind of, oh no, once that battery's gone, it's gone, and I think we have to educate people that isn't actually the case, and how do these actual sort of fuel cells work. And again, it's because it's still expensive to own an EV, and actually second-hand EV market is somewhere that a lot more people should be looking, but there is still that concern. And again, it's sort of, it's an educational point, but it's drawing parallels between whether it's pre-loved tech, pre-loved fashion, pre-loved, pre-loved is such a huge market in other areas with less of a stigma attached to it. And that's the way, in terms of sort of circular economy and everything else, that's sort of the way we're going to have to go.
Yeah.
So let's sort of create some positive communication around that, and not, get everyone scared of, their batteries are suddenly going to die off as soon as they drive off a forecourt.
But I don't get the difference. I couldn't own, all three of my boys have now, so they're in their, I've got, they're ranging from 18 to 22. They've all had second-hand cars. I had a second-hand car for years. There wasn't an issue with a pre-owned engine. You had no idea how the previous owner had driven it. One careful lady driver, whatever, however many miles was on it. Yeah. So I think we seem to be getting a bit lost or wrapped up in the powertrain. And the powertrain is either a battery or electric motor, or which is powered by a battery, or you've got an engine, which could have been utterly thrashed, frankly. You'd never buy an express car because we spent our lives working on magazines. And all of a journalist, you look at the stuff coming out of Top Gear, when they finish with it, you're like, you do not want that.
No.
After one of the Top Gear journalists had literally taken it around a track, because it would have its back end hanging out. So I think we do probably get a bit wrapped up in this perception that the battery, we've got to be fixated on the health of the battery. And we're now working with retailers to do things like EVHC, so electric vehicle health check.
Yeah.
And the EVHC is one way of getting consumers back in and to start to build trust in the experience. So I think how we as an industry start to help and handhold consumers into making this decision is going to be really, really important. And it's not just, I know your whole agency is built on She's Electric, and that was about how do you help women. And unless you've ever had to walk home on your own, you don't understand the issue of safety. And, and I think that's something that, Sarah Noble from Deloitte was saying, when you think about where sometimes in the early days, the charging point was round the back in the dark. You're like, I don't want to sit there, or park there and walk home and then have to walk back if you're having to use public charging. So I suppose it's being mindful of how consumers will make decisions based on their age, demographic. My boys also probably wouldn't feel safe charging round the back on their own in a strange place because they're in their early 20s and they're not sure necessarily where they are. So I think there's lots that we can do to make charging in a lot more visible places, so you can charge in many more places as you're just going around your daily life.
Kate Tyrrell at Charge Safe has done some amazing work around that and continues to do some incredible work. And again, it's that sort of, because we can do all the talking, can't we? And then you have people like Kate who are out there who are talking about accessibility and who are talking about how we can make sure this works for everyone and holding people to account. And I think that's really important. With obviously with any kind of new technology, and with Still Curious, we've done quite a lot of work in terms of accessibility and innovation, which is always really interesting. Not just from the point of view of having diverse teams who create this technology for you, but also thinking of all the possible end users when you're creating a product. And I think when we're trying to drive change at the speed at which we're trying to drive it, to your point, we haven't got long. And I think that's where She's Electric comes from. Really, it's not a case of women need anything in a different way to men, but we need both genders. We need everybody changing faster. What can we do to make that process faster? So I think that's where it all kind of comes from. But I think people, there are lots of organisations, but obviously people like Kate out there who are making sure that as this change is happening at the speed it's happening, we're not leaving people behind. And I think we've come on leaps and bounds in relation to sort of safety and to women and to understanding, that you're not going to want to go and charge your car in the back end of a car park where the light's broken.
Not really, no. I mean, I'm lucky I have an at-home charger, and now my little atomic gain is that I automatically park it next to the charger. I get out of my car and I plug it in. I don't even think about it, and I always check as I go to bed, did I plug it in? Did I remember to plug it in? So I get really annoyed with myself if I've forgotten. Like, so it's things like that. So just thinking about, as we wrap up the episode, what are the really good sources that you could point retailers towards as they try and help consumers make this switch? Because I think there are lots of key questions they could be asking that will help consumers make that transition. What can we do to help the retailers to help their consumers?
Come and talk to us, because at the moment we've got actually there's a report that we worked on with Cox Automotive. I think that's going to be released in April, with some of the insights around what women in particular think when they're purchasing their cars. But I think I've said this to you before. My frustration at the moment is that we're working. We've got some brilliant relationships with OEMs. We've learned a lot. We're doing some great stuff with different partners. But actually, it's all well and good. But unless we can support the dealer network and the retailer network with this, because they're at the coalface and they're the ones my understanding of this market is probably not fantastic, but I understand the margins are small. They've got it's tough, and so you're asking them to take on some sort of massive EDI project at the same time as actually run their businesses, and often businesses like you say that have been in families for years and years, and it's not, it's hard to be agile when you're up against the things that they're up against. So as I say, we've got some of this sort of data and information that I think we need to be sharing, need to be getting out there. So that's one of those things. But I do think that I think a lot of it is around conversations, and a lot of it's around some of the basics. The two sides to it. One, which is just ensuring that as a woman walks into a dealership, the age-old thing of, she's not engaged with, we're still hearing that. And in this day and age, that there isn't really much of an excuse for it anymore. So I think just sort of being really, really hot on that. But then also looking at the technology and what opportunities that technology affords you in terms of, understanding people's lifestyles. I think when we were talking the other day, you were mentioning about, being able to, you should know that if that person had a baby when they came in 3 years ago, they're now in the realms of car seats and this, that, and the other. And just, I know it's old-fashioned sort of sales techniques, but it makes an enormous, enormous difference.
I think the quality of the process is really important, though. So if someone, and I was chatting to Scott Gaines, who's also MD of Sofas, he's saying now that what they're doing is they're tracking AI and how you can ask AI, and AI knows your demographic and your life stage. Mm-hmm. It'll know whether you had a baby or not, whether you've moved house, whether you're travelling. What car should I buy? And they're tracking now how search results in AI are being returned based on the demographic of the human searching. You're going to go, oh my God. Yeah. So actually, I do think I love good quality, and you call it old-fashioned sales, but sales 101. Help me as I walk in. It's like, do I know what I want? Do I need some help? Have I thought about this? And when I was buying my last vehicle, the fact that they didn't ask me whether I had a driveway and they were just trying to sell me the next version of what I had, I said to them, by the way, I've got an at-home charger, because I had one fitted because we had one fitted. So, but it was like, ask me, do I have a driveway? Do I need help with the charger? Because if you want to future-proof, you're choosing a car now for the next 3 years, it's very likely that you want to spend less money on fuel and less money on tax. So how can you help me make that decision? And I trust people that give me good advice. So the first person that explained what Isofix was when I had got a young child. If you haven't had a baby, you don't know what Isofix is. Yeah. But it's a way of literally you plug in your car seat to the vehicle without having to use a bloody seatbelt. Mm-hmm. And I used to take, when my kids are now older, but I used to take my life to the test drive. So I'd take all the car seats and my buggy, and if I couldn't fit it in the car, I wouldn't drive the car. Yeah. Simple. But actually, like things like that, having really good advice, I really then wanted to buy from that particular human because they made my life it made a difference. So I think it's okay to really lean into good quality sales. You're doing a job really well and helping a customer make the right decision.
And that comes back to the events thing again. I mean, people buy from people, and I know how important, obviously, the AI and with its I'd say there are still obviously limitations. AI is only learning from what's already out there, and what we know is already out there isn't necessarily perfect. Yeah. But yeah, people buying from people experiencing things, and I think if you want long-term loyalty, then whether that's at a brand level or at a dealership level, you have to build that in some way emotional connection. And I do think that's something that perhaps does sit slightly more on the kind of feminine side of business, in terms of perhaps historically the sides of business that we have not given enough credence to. Now, actually, we're seeing the benefits of that. We're seeing actually if you can, sell in that way, it might be a little bit more time intensive to start off with, but actually you do reap the benefits because we know people like myself who just go back and buy the same car 3 times because the guy does my service was great and she's taking the mick out of me about eating too much KFC, all that kind of, there's things I remember and I enjoy, just about making processes enjoyable.
Yeah. So I love that. I think we should definitely see more, just make it easy for people to make the transition. And we see retailers doing events all the time, with like used car events or whatever. If you can start to weave in EV education into your events, I think that would be a massive win just for consumers who then don't feel stupid asking the questions they feel they should be asking.
Yeah.
So anyway, watch this space. Hopefully we'll get you, around the world or around the country
great.
At least.
Yeah, I'll do a tour. On an electric bus. If you can give me an electric tour bus, I'll be yeah.
I'm sure we can find one.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Or get an idea. Get one of the Volkswagen buzzers to kind of take you around.
I love those.
They're so good, aren't they?
Yeah, they're great.
I just wish I could surf and I could feel like I could justify one.
Oh yeah, no, I'm never going to be able to surf. But it'd be great to watch lots of Netflix in the back of the nose.
I belly surfed. I can belly surf. That's it. I can't stand up anyway. Listen, Bex, thank you again so much for coming in. It's been really great chatting to you. And I think as we kind of over the next 12 months, we're going to see so much more innovation around EV adoption and how we can support. And I think we're back at Carfest again this year, so hopefully it won't rain. I'll see you there.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks so much.